Flashing red and blue lights cut through the pitch-black highway. A badge shouldn't be a shield for tyranny, but tonight an arrogant officer thought it made him a god. He looked the handcuffed man in the eye and sneered. "I'm the law here." He had no idea he'd just arrested a federal judge. The night was unusually thick, a heavy blanket of fog rolling off the Oak Haven River and creeping across Interstate 40. Inside the cabin of his 2024 BMW 7 Series, Samuel Henderson enjoyed the rare, profound silence. At 58 years old, Samuel was a man who carried the weight of the world on his broad, tailored shoulders. He had just wrapped up a grueling 3-week federal racketeering trial. As a United States District Judge for the federal court, his days were consumed by arguments, objections, and the heavy burden of handing down sentences that altered the course of human lives. Tonight, all he wanted was to reach his home in the quiet suburbs, pour a glass of aged bourbon, and sleep. He was driving precisely 2 miles under the speed limit, his cruise control locked. He was a man who lived his entire life by the letter of the law. But out here in the desolate stretches of Oak Haven County, the law was subjective. It was whatever the man with the badge and the gun decided it was. The sudden, piercing strobe of red and blue lights shattered the darkness of his rear-view mirror. Samuel sighed, his hands tightening slightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He checked his speedometer. He checked his mirrors. There was no erratic movement, no broken tail light, no expired tags. The car was immaculate, and his driving was flawless. Still, he activated his right turn signal, smoothly guiding the heavy luxury sedan onto the gravel shoulder. He shifted into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. As a veteran of the legal system, Samuel knew the protocol intimately. He placed his hands flat at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, leaving them in plain sight. In his side mirror, he watched the cruiser's door swing open. A figure stepped out, deliberately slow, adjusting his duty belt in a blatant display of authority. This was Officer Mitchell Barrett. Barrett was in his early 30s, a man whose aggressive posture and tight-jawed swagger preceded him. He had a reputation in the department for being a hardliner, a cop who viewed the citizens he was sworn to protect as inherent threats, especially if they didn't fit his narrow worldview. Barrett approached the BMW, shining a high-powered tactical flashlight directly into the driver's side mirror to blind the occupant before sweeping the beam aggressively into Samuel's face. "Keep your hands right where they are," Barrett barked, his voice dripping with unearned hostility. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," Samuel replied. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, a voice that had commanded silence in the most chaotic courtrooms in the country. It was calm, measured, and entirely devoid of fear. That calmness immediately rubbed Barrett the wrong way. He leaned in closer, the scent of cheap chewing gum and stale coffee wafting into the pristine interior of the BMW. "License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Now," Barrett demanded, keeping the blinding beam fixed on Samuel's eyes. "They are in my breast pocket and the glove compartment," Samuel stated clearly, narrating his movements to avoid any misunderstanding. "I am going to reach into my jacket with my right hand for my wallet." "I didn't tell you to negotiate. I told you to hand them over," Barrett snapped. "Move slow. You try anything stupid, we're going to have a major problem." Samuel slowly extracted his leather wallet from his tailored charcoal suit jacket. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it through the window. "May I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" Barrett snatched the card, barely looking at it. He was busy scanning the expensive interior of the vehicle, his eyes narrowing with deep-seated suspicion. A well-dressed man driving a $100,000 car late at night. In Barrett's prejudiced mind, the math always equaled something illegal. "You were swerving back there," Barrett lied, his tone dripping with condescension. "Crossing the center line." "That is factually incorrect," Samuel replied, his tone remaining even, though the steel in his voice was becoming apparent. "I have my cruise control set, and this vehicle is equipped with lane departure technology. It logs every movement. I assure you, there was no swerving." Barrett bristled. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not with such articulate, unbothered precision. He gripped the handle of his flashlight tighter. "Step out of the vehicle." Samuel did not immediately move. "Officer, a traffic stop for a purported moving violation does not automatically necessitate ordering the driver out of the vehicle unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime or a concern for your immediate safety. I am sitting with my hands visible. I am fully cooperative. Did you just quote the law to me, boy? Barrett's voice dropped an octave, a slur slipping out with practiced ease, hanging in the cold night air like toxic smoke. Samuel's jaw clenched. Inside him, a cold, righteous anger began to build. He had spent 30 years fighting for civil rights, prosecuting corrupt officials, and sitting on the federal bench to ensure that the Constitution applied to everyone. Yet here he was, reduced to a caricature by a man who had sworn an oath to the very Constitution he was actively violating. I asked you a question, Barrett sneered, unholstering his taser and letting it rest visibly in his grip. Step out of the car, or I will drag you out through the window. Knowing the legal parameters of the situation, and knowing that escalating a physical confrontation on a dark, lonely highway was a fatal risk, Samuel slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. I am stepping out, he announced. He pushed the door open and rose to his full height. At 6 feet 2 inches, Samuel towered over the stockier Barrett. The physical disparity only made the officer more aggressive. Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car. Spread your legs, Barrett shouted, shoving Samuel hard against the side of the BMW. The metal was cold against Samuel's cheek. This is an unlawful detention, Samuel said, his voice muffled against the car, but still retaining its commanding authority. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights, officer. I suggest you think very carefully about your next actions. Shut your mouth, Barrett barked. He aggressively patted Samuel down, his hands unnecessarily rough as he searched the judge's tailored suit. He found the wallet again and yanked it from Samuel's pocket, tossing it carelessly onto the hood of the cruiser. You think because you drive a fancy German car and wear a nice suit, you can run your mouth to police? Barrett taunted, grabbing Samuel's wrists and wrenching them painfully behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around Samuel's wrists, ratcheted far too tight, biting into his skin. You're under arrest, Barrett declared, thoroughly enjoying his power trip. On what charge? Samuel asked, his voice chillingly calm. Failure to comply with a lawful order, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. Take your pick, Barrett laughed, spinning Samuel around and pushing him toward the police cruiser. Before getting into the back seat, Samuel stopped and locked his dark, piercing eyes onto Barrett's. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Samuel said, emphasizing every syllable. Barrett leaned in, his face inches from Samuel's, his breath foul. He smiled a crooked, arrogant smile. Listen to me very closely, Barrett whispered, poking Samuel hard in the chest. Out here on this highway, I don't care who you think you are. I don't care what kind of fancy lawyer you think you can afford. Out here, I'm the law. Samuel didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He looked at the arrogant rookie with the pity and disdain one reserves for a fool who has just sealed his own fate. I am the Honorable Samuel Henderson, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the night like a scalpel. I am a United States federal judge for this district. And by this time tomorrow, officer, you will be finished. Barrett threw his head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh. A federal judge? Yeah, right. And I'm the President of the United States. Get in the car, Your Honor. With a hard, violent shove, Barrett forced the federal judge into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat of the patrol cruiser and slammed the door shut. The ride to the Ridgefield County Sheriff's Department was cloaked in heavy, suffocating silence. In the driver's seat, Officer Barrett was practically humming, visibly thrilled by his own perceived dominance. He occasionally glanced in the rear-view mirror, expecting to see his captive sweating, panicking, or begging for a break. That was the usual script. People always broke. They always realized they were at the mercy of the badge. But Samuel Henderson did not break. He sat completely rigid in the back seat, his face an impenetrable mask of stone. He wasn't looking at Barrett. He was looking through him. In Samuel's mind, he was already laying out the docket, cataloging every civil rights violation, every procedural failure, every constitutional breach that had occurred over the last 20 minutes. Barrett thought he was driving a suspect to a holding cell. In reality, he was chauffeuring his own executioner to the gallows of his career. The cruiser pulled into the poorly lit parking lot of the Ridgefield precinct, a concrete brutalist building that looked more like a bunker than a public service office. Barrett parked, threw it into park, and hopped out. He opened the rear door and yanked Samuel out by the arm, deliberately twisting the handcuffs to inflict a sharp burst of pain. Samuel gritted his teeth but remained entirely silent. He allowed himself to be marched through the double-glass doors of the precinct. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed with a nauseating yellow hum. It was 1:15 a.m. The station was mostly empty, save for a few deputies drinking stale coffee in the break room and the desk sergeant sitting behind the raised booking counter. Desk Sergeant William Foster was a 25-year veteran of the force. He had graying hair, heavy bags under his eyes, and a profound weariness that only came from decades of dealing with the worst of humanity. Foster was counting the days until his pension kicked in. He didn't like drama, and he especially didn't like Officer Mitchell Barrett, whose aggressive tactics had been the subject of numerous internal complaints that the brass kept sweeping under the rug. "What do we have here, Barrett?" Foster asked, barely looking up from his computer screen as Barrett marched the handcuffed man to the counter. "Got a live one tonight, Sarge," Barrett said proudly, leaning against the counter. Pulled him over for swerving on the 40. He got combative, refused lawful orders, started quoting fake laws, and resisted. Had to cuff him. Foster finally looked up. He took in the sight of the suspect, the immaculate, though now slightly wrinkled, suit, the expensive silk tie. But more importantly, he saw the man's face. There was no fear, no intoxication, no frantic energy. There was only a cold, terrifying composure. Foster's instincts, honed over a quarter of a century, immediately flared. Something was very, very wrong. "Name?" Foster asked, looking at Samuel. "He says he's a federal judge," Barrett interjected, letting out a loud, braying laugh. "Told me I was finished. Can you believe this guy?" Foster didn't laugh. He looked directly into Samuel's eyes. The stoic, unyielding gaze of the man in handcuffs sent a sudden, icy chill down the desk sergeant's spine. "Sir, can I have your name?" "My name is Samuel Henderson," he replied, his voice echoing slightly in the empty booking room. Barrett pulled Samuel's leather wallet from his tactical vest and tossed it onto the booking counter. "Driver's license is in there. I'm going to start the paperwork for resisting and failure to comply. Book him in holding cell 3. "Wait a minute," Foster muttered. He reached out and picked up the high-quality leather wallet. It felt heavy, expensive. He opened the fold to retrieve the driver's license. As the wallet flipped open, the fluorescent lights of the precinct caught a heavy, gleaming piece of metal secured on the left flap. It was a solid gold shield flanked by the Great Seal of the United States. Below it, a heavy embossed identification card bore the official seal of the Department of Justice. The text was printed in bold, undeniable lettering. United States District Court, Judge Samuel T. Henderson, Article 3 Federal Judge. Foster stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to instantly evaporate. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of ash white. His hands, which had held thousands of licenses from petty thieves and drunk drivers, began to tremble violently. He stared at the credentials, then looked up at the man in the handcuffs. He recognized him now. He had seen him on the local news just last week, presiding over a massive cartel money laundering case in the city. "Barrett," Foster whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes, Sarge? You want me to do the fingerprinting?" "Shut up," Foster snapped, his voice suddenly sharp with sheer panic. He grabbed a set of handcuff keys from the desk and practically sprinted around the counter. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Barrett asked, confused and instantly defensive. "He's combative." "Shut your damn mouth, Mitchell," Foster roared, his voice echoing violently off the concrete walls. Foster reached Samuel and, with trembling hands, quickly unlocked the heavy steel cuffs. The moment the metal clicked open, Foster took 2 steps back as if he had just uncaged a lion and stood rigidly at attention. "Your Honor," Foster stammered, his voice laced with absolute terror. I am so profoundly sorry. I had no idea." Samuel slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing the deep red indentations on his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. He adjusted his suit jacket, pulling the lapels straight, reclaiming his physical dignity. Barrett stood frozen, his arrogant smirk slowly melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Wait, Your Honor? Sarge, what are you talking about? He's lying." Foster turned slowly, his eyes wide and furious. He held up the wallet, displaying the gleaming federal badge and the judicial identification card for Barrett to see. "You stupid, arrogant. Do you know who this is? You didn't just arrest a civilian, Barrett. You assaulted and illegally detained a sitting United States federal judge." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the lights and the sudden shallow breathing of Officer Mitchell Barrett as the realization of his catastrophic mistake began to set in. Samuel Henderson stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the young officer. The calm had never left Samuel's face, but now it was accompanied by the full, overwhelming weight of the United States justice system. "I told you on the highway, Officer Barrett," Samuel said softly, his baritone voice sending shock waves through the air. "I am the law, and you are finished." Officer Mitchell Barrett stared at the gleaming gold seal. The air was violently sucked from his lungs, leaving a cold, terrifying vacuum in his chest. A sitting Article 3 federal judge. In his aggressive haste, Barrett had completely bypassed every standard protocol, driven by an inflated ego and a deeply ingrained, unchecked prejudice. Sergeant William Foster scrambled frantically for the precinct's heavy landline telephone, his pale hands slick with cold sweat. He bypassed the shift lieutenant entirely and directly dialed the personal cellular number of Police Chief Gregory Davis. It was exactly 1:32 a.m. Chief Davis answered on the fourth ring, his deep voice gruff and heavy with sleep. "Foster, this had better be a catastrophic disaster." Foster's voice trembled uncontrollably. "It is a catastrophic emergency, Chief. Officer Barrett just brought in a suspect for a fabricated traffic violation. He arrested him. He handcuffed and aggressively detained federal judge Samuel Henderson." Absolute silence hung heavily on the telephone line, thick and suffocating. When Chief Davis finally spoke, the lingering sleep was entirely gone from his voice, rapidly replaced by a cold, overwhelming terror. "Do not book him. Do not put him in a holding cell. Offer him whatever he wants. I am on my way right now. Confiscate Barrett's service weapon and badge immediately. He is officially suspended pending a full federal investigation." Foster hung up the heavy plastic receiver and slowly turned back to the brightly lit room. He looked directly at Barrett, who was now leaning weakly against the painted concrete wall, his face entirely devoid of color. "Barrett," Foster said, his voice flat, completely devoid of any previous camaraderie. "Hand over your service weapon right now. Your taser, your radio, and your badge. You are stripped of your police powers, effective immediately, per Chief Davis." Barrett's hands visibly shook as he unholstered his loaded Glock 19, placing it carefully on the booking desk. He unpinned his bright silver shield, the very shield he had proudly used as a blunt bludgeon just 30 minutes prior, and set it down with a surprisingly hollow clatter. Judge Henderson stood quietly in the center of the room, slowly massaging his bruised wrists. He did not yell. He did not gloat. The quiet, profound dignity with which he carried himself made the entire situation infinitely worse for the disgraced young officer. "I was just doing my job," Barrett whispered, a pathetic, desperate attempt to somehow rationalize his terrible actions. He was swerving on the highway. He blatantly refused a lawful order. "Your job, Mr. Barrett," Henderson finally spoke, his baritone tone measured, cold, and precise, "is to faithfully uphold the Constitution of the United States. You unlawfully utilized your uniform to execute a personal vendetta against a private citizen you deemed suspicious based entirely on your own internal bias. You completely falsified a moving traffic violation, dangerously escalated a nonviolent encounter, and enacted a totally unlawful arrest." The heavy reinforced steel door of the precinct suddenly buzzed loudly and flew open. Chief Gregory Davis stormed inside, hurriedly throwing his dark jacket over a hastily donned uniform shirt. He took one look at Judge Henderson, carefully noting the wrinkled luxury suit and the harsh red marks on his wrists, and stopped dead in his tracks. "Your Honor," Chief Davis said quietly, extending a trembling hand, his face pale and distressed. "I cannot possibly express the immense depth of my sincere apologies. This is an absolute, unforgivable disgrace to this entire department." "An apology is officially noted, Chief Davis," Henderson firmly replied, completely ignoring the extended hand. "However, Verbal apologies do not correct systemic constitutional violations. I will be directly contacting Special Agent in Charge Robert Hughes at the Regional FBI Field Office first thing in the morning. I am formally filing a civil rights complaint under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Furthermore, I expect complete, immediate preservation of all related body camera footage, dash camera footage, and precinct audio recordings. Chief Davis swallowed hard. Section 242 was a serious federal felony. It will be done immediately, Your Honor. The resulting fallout was remarkably swift and completely merciless. By sunrise, the shocking story had already leaked to the local press. A rogue patrolman arresting a prominent, highly respected federal judge on a desolate stretch of dark highway was a massive media powder keg waiting to explode. But this was not merely a public relations nightmare. It was a severe federal incident. Within 48 hours, the United States Department of Justice publicly announced a sweeping civil rights investigation into the Ridgefield County Sheriff's Department. Special Agent Robert Hughes descended rapidly on the small precinct with a dedicated team of federal investigators. They immediately seized the crucial dash camera footage from Barrett's patrol cruiser. The video evidence was absolutely damning. It perfectly corroborated every word Judge Henderson had calmly spoken: flawless driving, zero erratic movement, and immediate, respectful compliance with the traffic stop. It brilliantly captured the blinding tactical flashlight, the completely unwarranted aggression, the vile slur, and the brutal physical assault of placing the federal judge in overly tight steel handcuffs without any valid legal justification whatsoever. Mitchell Barrett quickly found himself utterly isolated. The powerful police union, having carefully reviewed the unassailable video evidence, swiftly withdrew their legal support. He was formally terminated from the police department within 5 days. But losing his career was merely the beginning of his devastating ordeal. 3 months later, Barrett stood trembling in a massive federal courtroom. He was no longer wearing a shiny badge or a crisp blue uniform. He wore a drab gray suit, standing nervously at the wooden defense table. The charge was exceptionally severe, a heavy federal indictment for intentionally violating the civil rights of Samuel Henderson. The trial was brief. The presented evidence was entirely insurmountable. When the jury returned their final verdict after only 2 short hours of deliberation, the word guilty echoed loudly and clearly in the completely silent room. The sentencing phase finally brought Barrett face to face with the harsh reality of his actions. The presiding magistrate sentenced him to 48 long months in a secure federal penitentiary. As the federal marshals approached to take him into custody, Barrett looked across the crowded courtroom, desperately hoping for a glimmer of human sympathy. But the gallery was filled with everyday citizens who had suffered under his heavy-handed, aggressive tactics for many long years. No one wept for him. Meanwhile, Judge Samuel Henderson calmly returned to his busy courtroom. He sat high and proud on the mahogany bench, the Great Seal of the United States gleaming brightly behind him. The traumatic ordeal had not broken his spirit. It had significantly fortified his resolve. It served as a stark, daily reminder of exactly why he had passionately dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of the law. He looked out over the crowded gallery, adjusting his heavy black judicial robes. He fully knew that the justice system was inherently flawed, often run by deeply imperfect individuals. But he also knew with absolute certainty that when the law was wielded with true integrity and fairness, it remained the greatest shield humanity possessed against unchecked tyranny. The silver badge did not magically grant total immunity from ultimate justice. Did you enjoy this story of justice prevailing against arrogance? If you want more dramatic tales where power meets a match in the courtroom, hit that like button right now. Please share this video with your friends to help spread the word about always knowing your legal rights. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Drop a comment below with your favorite unexpected twist.